Hello friends, welcome to my channel. I am JC Berne, author of Wistful Ascending and owner of these cool new business cards. See that? Check that out. Got Wistful. I'm going to a con at the end of Labor Day. I'm going to Dragon Con, so I'm going to have these cards. So if people show interest in my books, I can just say, here's a card. You can scan a little QR code and you can see my website. Will this work? Will anyone take a card? I don't know, but I got them because they're cute. And I got a little cute little purple. See the theme here? I got the purple color, a little purple card holder. I've been away. I have not had any videos for a while. I apologize. Life gets in the way. This isn't my primary job, as you can imagine. But this is Book Burning, a show where I talk about books, comics, movies, and whatever else comes to my mind. And I promise to never, ever burn a book. And today's topic comes courtesy of Johanna, who has a lovely YouTube channel whose name I realized I don't know. It's called Johanna, so that's amazing. I'll try to link her in the description if I remember to do that. And she had a video, lovely video, called Pacing Perceptions in Fantasy, featuring Alan, Murphy, and Jimmy, with Jimmy Nuts, Murphy Napier, and Alan from the Library of Alexandria. And I watched this. This came out as a time I'm recording this. It's been 10 days. It's been a little while. And Johanna's channel is generally excellent. Love her videos. She talks about books, mostly genre fiction, I think. And she also has usually very good things to say. And this one was about pace, and specifically what people mean by pace, and so forth. And I thought, well, the people there were saying some great things about pace and about how pace affects the reading experience and what kind of pace they enjoy and so on and so forth. I don't think I got what to me felt like a satisfactory definition of what pace is. And I thought, well, I like definitions. I like explaining what words mean. That's my thing. So can I come up with a more sort of pinned down notion of what pace is when we're talking about in a story, the pace of a story, which I guess could be a movie, a TV show, a comic, a book, anything like that, where you're sort of going along. And yeah, so I thought I would talk a little bit about what pace means, what it means when we say a book is fast-paced or slow-paced, or in parts of it are, and then a little bit about how that differs from action or difference from happening. And I think this would be of more use to writers, but it might be of use to readers as well. I'm not sure. If you have any feelings at the end of the video, or if you, at the beginning of the video, feel free to put them in the comments below. I'd love to hear what you guys think. And yeah, so pace. I have notes. I don't have much in the way of notes. I'm sorry. I'm procrastinating. I'm supposed to be starting a new book today that I came up with just a few days ago, and I'm really dreading that first chapter because my first chapters are not good. More than usual, I'm dreading it. So I'm doing this to procrastinate. So you're welcome, or I'm sorry. Something in some quantum combination of the two, I think. Okay. So pace. Pace, okay, when we talk about pace, I'm going to start with what I think is our first inclination, which we sort of realize is wrong. But your first inclination is to think that pace is a variable that describes how much action is happening over the course of the length of a book, or a section, like per page, how many fights are happening, how many chase scenes are occurring. We think of a fast-paced story, the first thing that comes to mind is something like a thriller with a lot of action scenes, right? We don't think of a romantic comedy as being fast-paced. Maybe we do, but that's not I think the primary thing that comes to mind. And but then when we read, sometimes we find there are these books that are full of action, but they can feel very slow and grinding. There can be like a battle that just drags on. There can be people dying and being, and killing, obviously, one goes with the other, on every page, a slaughter. And that seems like a lot of action, and yet it can just be so slow to read. It can feel very slow. And that contradicts our initial impulse to say that it's just action per page. It makes us say that that's not really it. And I think I was later in my writing career, or relatively, that I realized what I think we actually mean by pace, which is not action per page. It's not a description. And it has to do with something called, so I'm going to have to start again by defining something else to get to pace, something called turns. Now, the term turn, when someone says the turn in a scene or of a scene, is a word, that's a term used by lots of people to talk about writing structure. And I don't want to So this isn't original to me, but the way I'm portraying it might be different than what some of these like writing books will tell you. So I'm not going to say who I got this idea from, because I don't want to. If maybe I'm misrepresenting them, but what I mean is similar to what they mean. A turn in a scene is a shift or a change in something that happens. So. Change in some momentum or direction of some quality or variable. It sounds very abstract. I think it's easier to understand what a turn is if you give an example. A turn in a fight. You could have a fight where two guys are boxing, they're punching each other, right? And each one, they're kind of trading jabs. Each one hits the other one once in a while, and then all of a sudden, one guy lands a really hard punch. The other guy staggers, and now he's totally on the defensive, and he's just getting hit. Right? That's a turn. We go from a stage where they're sort of evenly matched to where one guy's only on the defense, the other guy's hitting him. A turn can be, obviously you can think of similar examples in like a war, like a battle scene, right? A turn is where there's a shift in momentum. One side's winning, now the other side's winning. A turn can be happen in a story where just someone learns something that changes their understanding. Oh, our guide to pull us into this trap. So we're going along, this guide's leading us along. Oh, now I just realized that guide is actually a spy for the enemy, and he's led us into a trap. There's a turn. You're making progress in a direction in the narrative, and all of a sudden you realize it's wrong, it's switched. Something has shifted in the other direction. This person you thought was your ally turns out to be your enemy. The whole soap opera thing. It's the turns that happen. Like, oh, you're actually, you're not my sister. You're my wife. Or the person. This person. There's this mysterious person in the hospital. Who's this guest? They turn around. It's actually the long lost missing character who has been gone since earlier that season. Right? These shifts in understanding. These are turns. Where all of a sudden we learn something new, and our perspective of what everything means has shifted, has changed. These are turns. And again, if you have two sort of army, and here's the thing, right? If you can have a lot of action without a turn. You can have a chase scene. Guy's driving, people are driving after him. He just drives along, and he skids down here, and he's constantly ahead of them, and then he goes down this street and up this street, and they're chasing. And that can just go on. There's no real, it can be very actiony, right? It can be like, oh, the tires are squealing. Oh, he just went through, and oh, like he barely made it over that corner or through that tunnel. But have you ever seen chase scenes? A lot of them can get kind of boring at some point because you're like, in a way, nothing's happening. Nothing's actually changing. There's still a guy being chased by a bunch of, or a girl. I'm sorry, I don't mean to be sexist, but some vehicle being chased by a bunch of other vehicles. And in action scenes, what they'll do is they'll punctuate it, like in a film often, with like really cool stunts that you've never seen before, and that gives you the feeling of pace of things happening, because you're like, oh, and he then the guy is running, and then he like jumps and like twists sideways and goes between two sheets of panes of glass or something, and you're like, I've never seen that before. It does some weird parkour move, which only works if you haven't seen these things before. Maybe when chase scenes were new, squealing tires are probably super exciting by itself. At this point, we've all become jaded to it. So turns have to be shifts and changes. And the tricky part about turns is turns can be small or large, right? So a shift in understanding, like, you can have two characters visiting someone else in a castle. Over time, they gradually realize the castle's not everything they thought it was. They can happen in very small increments, very small changes as little creepy things start to add up. Those are turns, but they're really small turns. Or, they could suddenly, like, the owner of the house comes out with a hatchet and tries to kill them. Like, okay, that's a big turn. This person I thought was, my benefactor or my host is now trying to chop my head off. That's a big turn. So there can be small incremental changes as they become, things seem more and more perilous in little bits, or it can be a huge shift. So we can think of turns as having like a magnitude or a size, how big the turn is, how much has changed. Or again, like really, and you think about a lot of like romances, you'll have these turns are very small. They're spread out through the story as two characters. Why do they always start off hating each other? Because they have to, right? Otherwise, it's a very short romance. They start off liking each other very quickly, and there's a huge obstacle. How do you overcome the obstacle? How do you overcome the other person's resistance? Little small incremental changes happen. It's gradual. That's fine. There's nothing wrong. Nothing wrong with any of it. But so turns can be big or they can be small. And the other thing is turns can nullify each other. It's It's very easy if you have turns go one way and then back, and then one way and then back, and they reverse. So you end up kind of back where you were. It's very easy for those turns to feel like they didn't happen at all. Back and forth is very hard to pull off. I'm not going to say it's impossible, but it's very hard. And this is why a lot of fight scenes are boring, because you'll have like, oh, and then in this round, this guy's winning and he's landing more punches. And in the next round, the other guy's landing more punches. And then the first guy's landing even more punches in the fourth round. And you're like, okay, I get it. There swings, it's going back and forth. But if it's going back and forth and too evenly, if it doesn't seem like there's been some overall change in the picture, if after the second back and forth, kind of back where we started, neither guy's really doing anything different, it's boring. Even though there's been shifts in momentum, it feels like there haven't been, because the turns got us back to where we were. So you've got another good example of action with no turns. One of my favorite is if you read. I'm not sure. I don't remember which books these were in, but there's a few places in Malazan, which I love. Don't get me wrong. None of this saying that something was slow paced is not saying it's bad. But we'll get to that later. It's an army traveling through like a jungle with like guerrilla fighters, chipping away at the army. So every night more men die, and traps are laid, and men die, and they're just kind of grinding their way through the jungle. It's a pretty good example of a thing. You can have a lot of action, you can have a lot of fights going there, but it's like, okay, they're in the jungle, they're moving again, okay. Waiting for something to happen here, and there's all these things happening, but it doesn't feel like it. And that can be done on purpose, right? I'm not saying that's bad writing. I'm saying that that's a slow, even though stuff is happening, it feels slow paced. So we start off with turns, and then I'm going to define pace. Okay, so we have this idea of turns. So over the course of a section of a book, let's say, you can break it down any way you want. You can break down the book as a whole, or you can say like the first third or the middle, however you want. Any section, you can take that part of the book. It can be. You probably can't do it to like an individual page or paragraph. It doesn't. We don't talk about the pace of a page. It has to be at least probably chapters. I don't want to get too technical here. But you take the how many turns happen per page. So if you have, and not how many turns, but we'd have to do some. And you're not really gonna like come up with a number. There were 72 turns, but the average magnitude of a turn was 1.3. So we'll multiply. You don't do that, right? There's a framework for thinking about it. You're not actually measuring it. You could. I'm not sure there'd be any point to actually doing it like on a spreadsheet, but maybe you could. But you have to think sort of like a big turn counts more than a small turn, so that if the magnitude is large, that counts more. So you can think of it as like a number, like that's a 3 turn or whatever number you want. And then a small turn, just have a smaller number. So you add up all those the sizes of the turns, that's how much you get, right? And then you sort of divide it by the page count, and you kind of get a feel for the pace of the book. And on a partial level, that's kind of accurate. I'm going to add a caveat, and I didn't really think about this until very recently. The page count is probably not enough. There are things that can make the length of the book. So we're taking this size of all the turns stacked together, divided by the size of the book. The size of the book on first blush, we would say, is just the page count or the word count of the book. I think we would probably want to do more. We'd want to pad that, because there are things when you're reading the book that slow you down, that make the book, even though the page count might be consistent, if certain things happen, it will slow down your reading experience, which means it'll make the divisor bigger, right? The number on the bottom will get bigger. It'll seem like a longer book. What can make a book seem longer? Anytime you have a shift in perspective, that usually makes the book seem longer, because your brain, you're going along with one perspective, a new perspective usually will make your brain, it'll be like a pause, like, wait, who's this guy again? What are we doing here? You've got to shift. Because that takes time, it'll feel like as if there were a couple pages added in there, even if they're not actual pages in there. I do this a lot in Wistful Ascending, and I regret it now. It's a cold open. So when you start a chapter and you don't really explain where you are relative to the end of the previous chapter, you're just like, we're sitting there drinking coffee, and then only in the course of the page do you explain, like, they're like, oh yeah, yesterday that explosion, man, that was crazy. And then your brain goes, okay, so this is the next day, it's after that explosion that closed the previous chapter, now I know where I am. But while you're working to find your bearings, you're slowed down, you're mentally, even if it's taking actually the same amount of actual literal time to read, it feels like a break. Like a stop in the pace. So that's not the same thing as adding page count or words, but it's going to make the book seem longer, so it'll effectively give you a slower or choppier, but a slower pace when you have things like that. And that's not necessarily bad. Slow pace is not necessarily bad. There are many writers who will deliberately have like a fast pace and then a slow pace and will vary the paces kind of like pulses. You'll have like a big fight scene and lots of things happening, lots of big revelations, and then they're all just sitting around drinking coffee and like relaxing. Like Howard Taylor, I think, talks about these catch your breath chapters or moments in the storyline where things are chill, deliberately having a slower pace. No big revelations happen, no big changes in momentum happen for a span of the book. A few pages or a chapter or a small chapter, so we can sort of catch our breath. Because if you get this unrelenting high pace, that can be also in a way sort of boring. You become kind of numbed. Too many changes too fast aren't great either for most readers. And readers are going to have a preference. Like, you're going to have specific people will say, Jimmy Nutt says he likes a slower book. I don't watch enough of Jimmy's videos to know if that's pans out, if I actually looked at all the ones he likes. But sure, like people like different kinds of paces. Some people have higher tolerance for slow paced sections. Other people will get to a slow paced section, they'll stop, they'll DNF. Right? So it really varies. And that's fine. And you can have a book that's deliberately slow. You can have these like little changes in character interactions that happen very subtly, that are very small, but add up over a long span of book to be significant. That can be a whole style of writing. Again, nothing wrong with it. You just have what could be a very good but slow-paced book. So, as a writer or as a reader, sometimes if you're reading and you're like, well, this fight scene is boring me, you might realize there really haven't been that many turns, or the turns have balanced each other out. You've gone back and forth, back to the same place you started. That's not fun. It's very hard to pull off. Watch Dragon Ball Z. It's very hard to pull off. Whether they pull it off or not, I'll leave that up to your discretion. Fights in general, fight manga. Actually, really interesting thing is watch the way fight analysts, people talking about like a UFC fight, talk about it after the fact. They'll try to explain the fight in terms of big moments and shifts in momentum. They won't explain anything else because it's boring. Like, you can watch the fight, but the long, slow parts where things don't really change, but they're just kind of trading punches, they won't describe that in great detail, because there's no point. So as a reader, if you're feeling bored or if you're feeling something slow, look for the turns. Is anything turning? Maybe it's not. If you're a writer especially, you have to be good at this. And I don't mean you have to use the word turn. You may never have heard this term. That's fine. But you have to actually be doing this. You have to actually be aware of how big your turns are, whether they balance each other out, how fast they're coming, and where you want the book to be fast and slow. Usually, you don't want a consistent pace throughout the book. Or you don't want a big change every 10 pages, like clockwork. In a way, that's boring or numbing. But you do want to be aware that you're going to have faster and slower parts, and to do that purposefully and not by accident. And again, the turns can be revelations. It can be changes in someone's feelings. It doesn't have to be something blowing up. It's usually not. Most books are not about things blowing up. We don't have demolition literature, right? I mean, it happens, but it's not most books. So, pace, that's what pace is. Whether you like fast or slow pace, that is entirely your call. I think there are interesting market forces pushing us towards a faster pace, especially in the beginnings of books. It's hard to sell a book as an unknown author if at the beginning isn't fast, because why would someone read a slow beginning and assume it's ever going to get anywhere? It feels like nothing's happening. It's a little tricky, but that in a way that you can write an infinite number of videos about how pace impacts books in general. But I don't want to talk about all that. I just want to sort of define what it is. So that's what pace is. That's what happened. Watch Johanna's video. I think that's interesting. Maybe what I just said will help shed some light on what the hosts in that video were trying to say, or what they were saying about their experiences as readers. And you can think more about what slows down a book. I've been thinking about this more, like I said, about the cold opens and point of view shifts and what else makes a book feel slow. I think another thing that can slow down the feeling of a book is throwing in a lot of new terminology, a lot of new words. Fantasy writers love to do that, throw in a lot of proper nouns and stuff that can slow down. So a page with a bunch of fresh proper nouns that you're trying to assimilate, that'll slow down the page compared to a page with relatively few. So there are other things that can do that too. And again, maybe it doesn't mean you shouldn't do that. It means that if you're doing it, you should know you're doing it. You should do it on purpose for a reason, and not just because you think it's cool. It might work if you just think it's cool, but you're gonna have a better chance of being successful if you're doing it with a plan. So this is JCM Berne, and I should get to writing. This is book burning. And please, if you disagree with my analysis, or if you agree with it, if you find value, if you have an argument to be had, by all means put it down. I have in the comments below. I have a couple more books coming out soon. Hopefully, we'll have cover reveals like in the next month and a half. So I hope you guys are doing great, and I hope you're having a wonderful summer. So take care.